Hello, my name is Andrea Mower, and I'm a technology consultant with PWC. I focus primarily on augmented and virtual reality, which may be surprising to you that PWC has employees completely dedicated to AR and VR. The truth is, there are varying levels of applicability for these technologies to different sectors, but today I'm going to be talking about an area that is applicable to almost every enterprise, and that is training on leadership skills in VR. Leadership skills, which are sometimes called soft skills, aren't necessarily the capabilities that you were hired for in your job, but they could have influence on how long your company wants to keep you around. Some examples of leadership skill topics include anti-bribery and anti-corruption, fostering belonging with coworkers, providing effective feedback, succinct verbal communications, managing frustrated employees or customers, and leading through times of uncertainty. We've found that VR can be very effective in preparing people for these scenarios. So today, we will look at how using simulations in VR for training stacks up for us at PWC when we compared it to our traditional training methods like eLearn and Classroom. I'll also share our findings about the cost effectiveness when we did it at scale. Overall, I think you'll see that there's value in using VR in this space. So first, let's look at some numbers around the demand for a better way to train on these topics. From the Global CEO Survey, we saw that 3/4 of CEOs are concerned that their employees don't actually have the right skills. Now, these leadership skills are really critical. They end up impacting not only workplace performance, but occasionally you'll see companies in the news who have a significant lawsuit filed and financial penalties in place because the employees lack these critical skills. We see the vast majority of CEOs would not say that their upskilling programs are very effective. And in the next slide, we'll look at some areas where classroom and e-learning might be falling short. The biggest challenge may be when companies decide not to invest at all in leadership skills training. But those who do often settle for training that doesn't really connect or doesn't stick with their employees. Most of us have probably sat through really boring classroom training at some point. Hopefully this is not an example of that. Or we've taken a required e-learning where we were frequently distracted, either with home distractions or a temptation to check email. Not to mention right now, with COVID, we're all experiencing social distancing that's requiring smaller classroom sizes and fewer opportunities for on-site training experiences. So there's definitely a need for improving training and having other options. So being a firm of largely accountants, we really wanted to quantify how much more effective a virtual reality training option could be for us on one of these leadership topics. Our hypothesis was that learners would be excited about the new type of training experience and that they would get more out of the simulation-based practice because it feels like it is on-the-job experience. So we decided to run an internal study. Our firm is very committed to diversity and inclusion, and in particular, training is given to managers and above that looks at recognizing how unconscious bias manifests in decisions about who we hire, who we staff on projects, and how we review people's performance. Last year, we decided to split up the group of new manager promotees, which is several thousand people, and put one group of them through our traditional classroom training, and then a group of them through an online version of that training. And then our third group, the remainder of the people, we put through a VR version of this training that we created. So let me tell you a little bit about that learner experience in VR. They find themselves in an office setting with a virtually animated character, which you can see an example on half the screen here. And the other half of the screen is a picture of people actually wearing headsets, taking a training. The participant talks to the virtual character. So script options appear for the learner to read, consider, and choose from. The learner makes selections by actually speaking the words out loud. And the character and the storyline reacts to the learner's choices. The training gives the learner a chance to recognize bias in the scenarios and react to them in real time. And then feedback is given to the learner after each of the scenarios. Overall, it was a really cool training, and most people felt like they were getting real experience in these difficult situations. So for all of our training modalities, we administered the same pre and post assessment, as well as a survey to get a more quantified idea about the impact of using VR. Was it all hype, or were there some real benefits from the experience? We found there were several benefits to the VR learning. The first one that I'll note is that VR learners were able to learn 4 times faster than those in classroom. And this was because in VR, we were able to take out quite a bit of time for facilitation and explanations about the topics. We basically threw participants right into the scenarios in VR and gave them what they would do in the experience. Then we gave them a chance to think about what would you do in this experience and actually do it. And then we let them reflect on their performance and think about what they actually did, giving them feedback. And then we allowed them to retake the training, which we saw about 50% of people opted that they did want to practice at least one conversation again. But it was so much faster than a classroom experience, where if you're going to provide people in a class an opportunity to practice a skill, then you have to spend time setting up the scenario. If all the people in your role play scenario are live participants in the classroom who are learning about the topic for the first time, then you have to spend extra time lecturing them on the topic, helping them understand the context and decision-making in the scenario. And you always run the risk of those conversations straying and getting really off topic. And it's not necessarily guaranteed that a facilitator is going to be an expert and is going to be able to give quality feedback to whoever they happen to be listening to practice. And if you're having everyone practice at the same time, there's no way to get around and listen to every partnership who's practicing a specific scenario role play situation. So we were quite a bit faster when we did this in VR. The next stat that we have here is that the learners in VR were much more confident. And this was largely in part to the fact that we were giving them effective practice. So they felt like they know now how to respond to these situations when they happen. So for instance, in the simulation, there's somebody in the discussion who clearly has bias in one of the scenarios. And it's your responsibility as a participant to speak up and say, hey, I think you're being a little bit biased around Kevin. And so you have kind of the muscle memory of, okay, I'm hearing something, I'm feeling uncomfortable, and now I know I need to raise my voice. And the scenario gave me several things that I could say or ways that I could word that. And then some bad choices that some people did choose and then realized, oh gosh, that wasn't really the right road to go down. And maybe I'm not being as inclusive as I think I am. So we had people reporting feeling a higher connection to the content. And having interviewed a lot of people who took this training in VR, I'll tell you that most of them cared very much about the topic. And when getting feedback on their performance that they knew was very specific to the choices that they had made, they were really, some people, I think a lot of the emotional connection was happening in that space around getting feedback and realizing what their performance might mean to their coworkers in real life. And a lot of them expressed some gratitude for a safe place to be able to practice, a private place to be able to learn this, learn these skills. They also reported fewer instances of distraction during the training, which isn't really a big surprise when you think about people in virtual reality. Their eyes are going to be covered, so they're not able to give attention to any emails they're getting or buzzes or different notifications. They're pretty keyed into the experience, especially since it was so interactive. It's kind of demanding that they constantly pay attention and speak up and get involved. Perhaps the most surprising finding, though, is this last one, which is on the business side. We calculated that the cost to train would be 52% more effective than classroom when we hit 3,000 learners. And I'll talk more about the cost effectiveness at scale in a little bit. Here's my favorite stat from the training, because I also care a lot about this topic, is 75% of our VR learners reported having a wake-up call moment during the training. So they said that in getting feedback, they realized for the first time that they were not as inclusive as they previously believed in specific situations. So I think my primary message is that VR simulation-based experience was very effective, both in terms of learning and in terms of cost. We created a cost calculator to help us determine, for different populations being trained, there are different variables you can manipulate to understand and predict what the cost at scale would be for these different modalities. And we're seeing plenty of opportunity for VR to be a very, if not more, cost-effective option. We've been helping our clients pilot VR for themselves so they can see these benefits and what they might look like for their organization. And at PWC, we've been using VR more and more for our own people. In February, we put 3,000 consultants through another simulation training. This one was on sales conversations and sales techniques. And then in the last several months, while everybody's been working remotely, we've onboarded over 250 people to VR training while they've been working at home. So we're seeing the numbers pick up, and it's not too far off to think that all of us would be taking more and more training in VR as part of our employment. So I think now we have some time for some live questions. I think we have 5 minutes for that. And if you don't have a chance to get your question in, then my contact information is here on this slide, and you're welcome to reach out to me or connect on LinkedIn.